instead of something which is suitable for our climates, we are taking foreign plants from South America and planting them in our new developments, and we're chopping our trees into squares and mowing our lawns to an inch of their life. And these are tremendously costly. It takes a lot of money to keep plants like this, to keep them fertilized, to keep them watered, to keep them trimmed. So soil organic carbon is a potential pathway that we can use to reduce the carbon emissions of a city. Okay, thanks to everyone who came to listen to me for today. My name is Thary Gazi Goh, and today I'll be talking about small steps for big cities. Basically, what can we do for biodiversity within our cities? And I am part of the Urban Biodiversity Initiative. We don't really call ourselves UBI, we actually call ourselves UBI because we like potatoes and all sorts of tubers and stuff like that. Okay, so just to start, David Holmgren, who started this permaculture movement, has these 12 permaculture design principles. And one of the major principles is use small and slow solutions. And today we'll be talking mostly about these small and slow solutions, which can be implemented by almost anyone within a city. But before we talk about solutions, you have to talk about problems. Within our world right now, there are three really big problems. There's climate change, there is nitrogen cycle pollution, and there is biodiversity loss. So nitrogen pollution happens when fertilizers or sewage is put into the environment in excess amounts. And that causes rivers to be polluted, seas to be polluted. And there's very little that's actually being done to stop this. And of course, biodiversity loss is also a very major problem in which we're losing a lot of habitat and we're losing a lot of species very fast. In fact, it's so fast that sometimes we don't even know these species are there before they go extinct. So for today, I'll be talking about three small things that can be done. And these will be soil, society, and small. So starting with soil, a bit of a waste aside is that within Malaysia, stunting of children is actually a big problem. This is caused by malnourishment of children. And if you actually look at the studies and read the patterns that you see, child stunting actually cuts across almost all, it's not just the poor people who are stunted, even middle class or rich or quite wealthy people also report stunting. And if you look at the statistics, the most stunted population within Malaysia is the most stunted state within Malaysia is actually Putrajaya, which is a city. Partly this is due to access to nutrition and also changes in diets. But one thing that we should also look into is the amount of nutrients within our food. It has been recorded that our food is rapidly depleting in nutrition, especially micronutrients like copper, calcium, iron. So these things usually are picked up by plants, but they're not done very well anymore. And part of that is because plants have to get these from soil. We like to think of soil as just dirt under our feet, but in truth, soil is actually a living organism. It's, well, not even just an organism, it's a living community of organisms. There are plenty of things within the soil, eating, living, and these processes increase the nutrition value of the soil. They increase the amount of nutrients available in the soil, they increase the amount of elements which are very important for the growth of both plants and us as well. In fact, soil is a very complex system, and we only started to understand this within the last 20 years or so. So when we see trees, we tend to just think about the top part, when in actual fact, a lot is going on under the ground. The roots of trees are like a network that connects plants to each other. And also, these plants are also connected to their own communities of what we call mycorrhizae, or these are fungus and bacteria, which live connected to the roots. And it's these bacteria and fungus which help to the plant to gain access to nutrition within the soil. A very big problem with our current intensive farming or the current landscaping practices that we practice is that once you start adding nitrogen through fertilizer, what happens is that fertilizer kills all these fungi and bacteria. And in a way, your plants start to become addicted to the fertilizer, and they can't gain access to whatever's in the soil anymore. And over time, what you get is soil degradation. Your soil becomes less and less nutritious for the plants, and you have to depend more and more on artificial inputs. If you compare this to natural functioning ecosystems, where soil is constantly replenished through the actions of fungi and all the biodiversity within the soil. So when you compare this with the landscape that we have now, if you look at how we plant within cities, usually what people will do is they sweep up all the leaves, they throw it, they burn it, and that is reducing the inputs of the soil. And basically what we are doing within our cities is killing the soil. So having high soil biodiversity really, really helps. It makes it easier for plants to grow. It makes it more beneficial for all sorts of crops to grow. In fact, a lot of, and there are many ways that we can do this. And these are through sustainable practices. In fact, a lot of studies have been done by the FAO, the UN's FAO, which demonstrate that sustainable farming practices can actually increase soil biodiversity and in turn help people. And this is a very little known fact, and it's only relatively recently been studied, is the fact that soil is a major carbon sink. When leaves, when branches and wood falls into the soil, it is stored in the form of what we call soil organic carbon. In fact, a lot of the plants, when they feed their bacteria and fungi, what they do is that they feed these bacteria and fungi sugars, which they get from atmospheric carbon dioxide. So soil itself can act as a carbon sink. And when we start thinking of soil as a carbon sink, we actually have a tool that can help us to combat climate change, especially within cities, because the potential to build up topsoil within a city is much higher because usually our cities are totally depleted of topsoil. So soil organic carbon is a potential pathway that we can use to reduce the carbon emissions of a city. And having healthy soils also brings other benefits. Healthy porous soil stores and filters water, so it prevents flash floods. As well as it forms the basis for healthy food production. So the UN has actually been publishing a lot of information about this. It's actually not something that is all that hidden. And there are many ways that we can increase the sustainability of the soil and also take advantage of that to make our cities more livable. One of the major methods to rehabilitate soil is through food forests or through reforestation. So you can see that on the left there is what a natural forest looks like. It's many layers of forest with many different species mixed inside. One way that we can replicate these in human environments and still get a benefit out of it is to plant a lot of different species together in what we call a food forest. So you mix up your small plants with your large plants with your trees, and this helps to replenish the soil while actually getting some sort of productivity out of it. In fact, this kind of technology is not new technology. It's very, very, very old. If you look at how we've been planting around our houses for centuries, this is basically the same technique. My mother grew up in Georgetown in the 1960s, 1970s, and this is actually what they did during that time. Behind your house, you would have also a mix of plants. You use them for food, but they also help to replenish the soil in a time when people hardly could get chemical fertilizers. So usually people will term these things like halaman. In Malaysia, you term it as like halaman, dusun, or kampung garden. If you look through a lot of literature about regenerative farming and permaculture, they mention a lot this Javanese pekarangan. It's, you know, in Java, people tend to grow food around their houses. And it's actually been very, very well studied compared to what we do here. We actually don't talk about it enough. A good exercise is actually to check. You can look at the Wikipedia page between a kampung garden versus pekarangan. It's like a world of difference in terms of the research done. So that actually raises another question. Why did we choose to abandon indigenous solutions, which are very beneficial to our society? Not only do they help to preserve biodiversity, but they also, in a sustainable manner, but they also help to give resources to us. It provides us with food security, as well as other benefits such as water. It cleans the water, it cleans our air, it reduces temperature. So why did we choose to abandon those? And to answer that, we have to look at society. So this is the next part. This is something that my friend Benjamin calls the pembangunan problem. Is this idea that development in Malay is pembangunan, and within that word is already that very tough word bangunan. So people assume that in order to be developed, you must have buildings, you must have concrete, you must have all sorts of trappings of modernity. In fact, if you look at how modern developers are managing their landscapes, instead of choosing landscapes which reflect our own native agriculture, our own native species, they choose models which are inherited from colonial powers. Instead of something which is suitable for our climates, we are taking foreign plants from South America and planting them in our new developments, and we're chopping our trees into squares and mowing our lawns to an inch of their life. And these are tremendously costly. It takes a lot of money to keep plants like this, to keep them fertilized, to keep them watered, to keep them trimmed. And in many ways, it comes back to the idea that we have inherited some systems from colonialism, and we look up to some systems of colonialism without questioning it. In fact, you can see that we still use labor in a very wasteful manner. We have hundreds of people every day chopping up plants, basically harvesting a crop that we cannot eat. So all this nutrition, all this sunlight is going to waste. So perhaps what we can do is look at a pembangunan solution. So an very interesting thing about pembangunan is that the root word of pembangunan is not bangunan, it is bangun. You have to wake up and be aware of what we have within our own society, what knowledge we have, and what we can do as individuals to benefit our planet and society. In fact, if you look within the average Malaysian neighborhood, there is already this need to plant. We are planting plants all over wherever we can. In fact, during the MCO, people have gotten even more into planting. And these are practices that we've inherited because a lot of us are still very close to nature. So within your average neighborhood, there are so many things that can be done to benefit biodiversity. And it doesn't really cost as much. In fact, it brings more benefits than cost itself. So as society, what is in it for us when we try to start planting again in more natural forms of landscaping? A very major thing is our culture. So our culture is very, very intricately linked to plants. A lot of our foods are based on plants that we grow. You can't get a pulut tai tai without the bunga telang. In fact, when you consider the way that modern landscaping is done, modern landscaping tends to be all about the visual aesthetic. They plant flowers, they plant a lot of very visually attractive plants. Whereas our own landscaping methods, we don't try to please the eye, but we try to please our tongues. So it doesn't look as nice, but it tastes much better. And thinking about that also helps us to shorten our food chain. If we start practicing more simpler things, more home gardens, more food forests, more dusun, what we're actually doing is reducing the amount of transportation, and it reduces the amount of carbon needed to actually eat. It can go directly from local farms or farmers markets straight onto your plate, as opposed to our current practice, which is to import food. Some of it is coming from China, some of it is coming from India, and that puts a lot of strain on us. And that also exposes us to problems. Like during this whole coronavirus crisis, food security is now an issue. And I don't think that we should depend 100% on importing our foods. In fact, it puts us at incredible risk of famine if something ever goes wrong. Aside from that, I previously just touched a bit about nutrition, but a lot of the traditional foods and traditional plants that are planted around the house are actually very, very healthy. They contain many phenolics, flavonoids. The things which give them the flavor are also the things which give them anti-cancer properties, which make them antioxidants, which are very, very healthy to eat. And you can actually see that there has been a shift away from all these very healthy ulams into more industrial foods like cabbages and all that, which really don't give you as much. Aside from that, nature is not only good for your body, it's also good for your mind. There are many reviews, there are many studies which state that just being close to nature actually makes you healthier. There have been studies in hospitals where if you're right next to a window that looks out into nature, you actually get healthier faster, as opposed if you're just looking at a building or concrete. So just being closer to nature actually gives you many, many health benefits. And if you're a very greedy and short-sighted person, there's also reasons to plant more naturally. You can see recent trends. Everyone is into this eco trend right now. And the reason is because there is a correlation between house prices and how close it is to nature. So even developers are starting to jump onto this bandwagon. And perhaps most importantly is that nature actually is a very, very good classroom. There's so much that children can learn from nature by just being close to nature. They can go and explore, they can learn about biology, they can learn about ecology, they can learn about chemistry, all through interactions with nature. So these are very much the benefits that humans can derive from nature. But what about wildlife? What about animals and plants and protected species? So in this case, we'll start talking about the small. So I like to say that conservation suffers from the National Geographic special problem. A lot of our understanding of wildlife, a lot of the public perception of wildlife is kind of shaped by a lot of these documentaries, which tend to show like the lions of Serengeti or giraffes or zebras and all these very large animals. So when I say wildlife, people immediately imagine an elephant or something very, very large. But if we actually were to examine animals, or biodiversity in general, if you looked at the proportion of described species, you can see that vertebrates are just like 1% of diversity. And very, very large vertebrates are even less than that. There's like a very, very small percentage. In fact, a lot of life, a lot of animals are very, very small. Just a rough ballpark, I would say that the average animal is actually probably between 5 to 10 millimeters in size. So when you think about it that way, there's actually a lot of space for animals. There's a lot of space for wildlife. It's just that our perspectives tend to be very, very skewed. In fact, so this is a picture which I recently took. This is a 5-cent coin and I could fit 10 species on top of it. So that's just how small life actually is. It doesn't need a lot of space. In fact, you could have a single log and have a viable population of wildlife. So when we adopt these kind of perspectives, actually, this opens up a lot of space for conservation. You don't really need lots of tracts of virgin forests. What you need are small patches. And everyone, well, not everyone, but most people have access to small patches that they can alter in some way within a city. To give a very simple example, this is a car park in Rimba Ilmu Botanic Gardens. And over here, we practice mulching. So when leaves fall onto the ground, we do not sweep it up and throw it away. We just leave the leaves on the ground. And what that has happened is it has created space for wildlife. You can see that this is a nightjar. Nightjars, they lay their eggs on leaves, especially leaves in open areas. If you look carefully, you can actually see that there is a baby nightjar right underneath the mother nightjar. So even through very small interventions like these, you can drastically increase the biodiversity of the site. And this is just one animal, if you read. Once you dig into all these leaves, there's all sorts of things within that soil fauna itself. So thinking about this paradigm, we can actually use up many of what we would call unused space, all this interstitial space between buildings. A drain might actually become actual conservation space. Even small patches of vegetation can have butterflies, they can have dragonflies, they can have all sorts of insects interacting within that area. In fact, when you look at a city itself, cities usually are made out of small fragments of forest, but also within these fragments of forest are embedded within other spaces, within small neighborhoods. So there are gardens that we can use. You can imagine that cities in the future can be patches of many different diverse habitats, all interconnected. So there's movement between them, they can exchange species and they can support each other. Other examples, within University of Malaya itself, if you look at this small patch of banana trees and what people would call weeds and semak, there is enough habitat to support a population of protected bird-winged butterflies. We can even reimagine spaces such as below highways. This is also something that grows absolutely wild. There was actually no intervention involved. But you can see that even within shaded areas, understory plants can grow. And some of these understory plants can actually also be used by humans, like banana and so forth. So bringing that back to the ideas of home gardens, of gardens designed to preserve soil, not only can these gardens help to protect biodiversity in the soil, but they can also help to build up they can also help to modify the environment in terms of trees, in terms of small shrubs, and create habitat for many, many small animals, which can live within these environments. In fact, there are actually studies of how fruit gardens, when they are properly connected to forests, can act as additional habitat for plants and animals. So there is a way that maybe we need to shift our thinking of not just about trying to just preserve pristine forests, but there are many other avenues, especially, and these avenues are very close to us, the average person, and they also enable us to practice conservation within a place that's close to home. Very recently, there have been several publications as well about how we can create what we call novel ecosystems. So new ecosystems within our cities that can drive evolution. They can create new places for animals and plants to survive. So perhaps we can reimagine our cities, not just as places where we keep empty lawns which are cut and don't produce anything at all. Perhaps we can change our cities into urban food forests, which also can double as conservation habitat. You don't need to plant entire forests, but maybe within an agroforest, you can plant several different species of forest species, and they can survive right next to your food plants. So that helps to guarantee your soil, it helps to guarantee food security, and it also helps to alleviate the problem of biodiversity extinction. So we can imagine having several agroforest plants. In fact, if you look at traditional Malay gardens, there are up to maybe 90 species of trees which are planted within that garden itself. So that's already a huge amount of diversity there. Perhaps you can add a few more in between. And these in turn will create patches of high diversity within small areas. And if we can connect all of these, you have to remember that since a lot of diversity is insects and small animals, a lot of them actually can fly. So it's very important that we don't think about how animals disperse in human terms. A lot of animals can disperse in far better ways than we can imagine. So having highly connected patches of agroforestry can be a boon for our cities. In fact, it can be a model in which we can create very, very rich habitats very close to home. So to sum it up, it is possible for us to use whatever urban space is available to help to rebuild soil. And by rebuilding soil, we are both tackling the problem of climate change, because soil can act as a carbon sink. And we are also tackling the problem of biodiversity loss, as well as reducing the problem of nitrogen pollution. And we can do it with the tools that we have as a society right now. It's not something that's foreign to us, and we can leverage our own indigenous skills and abilities. And we also get many, many local benefits from it. And by doing so, we can benefit very, very small animals. It doesn't take a lot to be able to save a species, actually. You can imagine, maybe your own home garden can become like a refuge for 10 species that would have gone extinct otherwise. If you plant properly, if you keep some logs, if you allow some shade, if there's like a small patch of wild plants, you just let those wild plants grow. In many ways, that can help to preserve the biodiversity of that we have. It might not be 100% of the biodiversity. It might just be 40, 50%, but that's better than the zero that we have right now. So to end this, I'd just like to say that to many Malaysians, nature is culture. There isn't really a very big divide. And perhaps when we think about cities, we shouldn't be thinking solely about solutions, but we should be thinking about making a space for us to both live our traditions, and by doing so, we make space for nature itself. So yeah, this is the end of my talk. Thanks for listening.